Alright, hello fellow painters. This is the first of a series of art industry discussion videos that I've got planned for my channel, and they will be specifically for those who would like to take their work to a professional level, you know, like at a film studio or game studio, either in-house or as a freelancer. I'll do my best to stay on topic with a few important subjects per video, or feel free to mute the audio and enjoy the full painting demonstration playing in the background. This painting, by the way, is inspired by Michael Crichton's posthumous novel Dragon Teeth, which I'm looking forward to reading next week. Okay, to kick off the discussion, I'm going to combine two questions that I get asked a lot. The first is, how should I go about practicing? You know, getting yourself ready to work as a professional in the industry. That's the first question. The next question is, how do you break into the industry? How do you present yourself to art directors or employers who are looking to hire artists? Okay, so we've got those two questions, and yeah, they're pretty different questions in nature. And the first thing I want to do is actually draw the parallel between them so I can use that as kind of the underlying theme for the rest of this discussion. If I could boil it down to one word, the word is focus. Both questions spur thoughts that surround focus. Okay, so let's think about that word, focus. What exactly is focus? Probably the first image that comes to your mind when you think focus is a singular goal, maybe synonymous with goal, a singular place you'd like to be at some point in the future. The future might be a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, but it's like a target of sorts. The word focus might also imply that there are many distractions, because if you're focusing on one thing, that means you're maybe not focusing on 100 other things. For example, I'm a professional artist. I am not a professional soccer player, even though I enjoy playing soccer. So from that, let's infer two things. We have a specific point that we're trying to reach, and to do that, we inherently know that we have to downplay or maybe even ignore many other prospects. Okay, so I'm assuming most of us here are visual people. The image that's in my head is we're at point A, and the target, I used the word target a moment ago, the target is somewhere off in the horizon. So we have point A, where we are, and point B, the focus, where we want to get to. And here's an obvious statement. Getting from point A to point B requires a commitment to move. I mean, there'd be no need to focus on a goal if we were already there, right? So right here at this particular point of career planning, this is where I see a lot of students making an error in judgment. And the error is this. Having a focus is great, but it is not the same thing as knowing the direction to take. And that's because directions are not simply linear. My analogy a minute ago of focus being like a target is actually not a good image. The image a target puts in your head is that there is a straight line, like you're shooting an arrow, from point A to point B. But I'm going to tell you why that's not how focus should work in art practice. So think of two journeys you've taken in the past, and I mean literal journeys, like going to your grandparents' house or going on a hike. In both cases, you have a goal, a focus, a place you want to get to, but also in both of those cases, it would be completely foolish to assume that from point A to point B is a straight line. It'd be foolish to assume that you wouldn't have to take some turns and unexpected turns along the way. Like maybe to go to your grandma's house, you encounter a detour, like there's construction, and you have to take like a 10-minute detour around it. Or on the hike, you might have to circumnavigate, I don't know, some inlet to get to the place you initially pegged on the map. And if it's your first time on any of these journeys, there's just no way you can anticipate every little turn that you're going to be required to take. So the conclusion here is that focusing on a destination is not the same thing as knowing exactly how to get to the destination. Now, that's painfully obvious when it comes to those two examples. However, when it comes to art, and I've taught art for a long time, and I've seen many people who fail to make that connection. You might say, I want to be a concept artist in the film industry, and okay, that's the focus. But then from there, many people will draw the straight line and say, therefore, I have to paint a lot of concept art. And that sounds very logical, but I think there are major holes in that solution. It's problematic because you've preordained some kind of route from point A to point B, which puts you in danger of unconsciously shutting out any turns you might have to take along the way. It's kind of a problem of reverse engineering, and this is where I'll get into a personal story. My first ambition in art was actually not to be a painter. I wanted to be an animator. And more specifically, I wanted to be a Pixar animator. You know, this was in 1995 and Toy Story had just come out, so you can loop me in with the thousands of other people whose life ambitions were shaped by that movie. So I set my focus on becoming a Pixar animator. And what do Pixar animators do? They animate on the computer. So I made the conclusion that to become a Pixar animator, Animator, I would have to get the computer software and learn to animate on the computer. And man, I was really literal about it. I actually built a model of Mr. Potato Head, copying the Toy Story model, and tried to animate that. That's how tunnel visioned I was. Completely convinced, by the way, completely convinced that that was the right solution. Now, to fast forward, I hit a major brick wall because I had no drawing experience, I had no foundations, my animation was horrible, and after years of learning to pilot 3D software, I had to admit to myself that there was a massive gap between my work and a Pixar animator's work. And the scariest part was, I couldn't account for exactly what the difference was. I could see it, but I didn't know why. It was like, I don't know, dark matter or something. And the best thing I did for myself back then, and now that I think of it, it was my first introduction to this whole focus lesson, is I decided to just bite the bullet and look into why my work was lacking compared to a professional's. And I remember feeling disheartened when I learned that so many Pixar animators recommended becoming good at drawing in order to improve your animation. Those two things never computed in my head. Like the world of drawing was not even on the linear path I'd predetermined to become a good 3D animator. So I was charting that straight line where really there were turns along the way that I just couldn't expect. So at age 19, I took my very first life drawing class. I had no previous drawing experience, and of course my drawings were even worse than my animations, and it was an uncomfortable experience being back at square one. Now, little did I know that learning to draw would change my life, but I'll get to that part of the story in just a second. Because you're watching this video, it's probably not too far-fetched to assume that you have a focus, and that focus probably has something to do with painting, be it concept art or color keys or matte painting or backgrounds, something in the realm of painting. And just like how I looked up to Pixar animators as a way of marking my focus, you probably have your own favorite artists as well. Favorite artists who have jobs that maybe you'd like to obtain one day. And that is all great. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I'd like to give you my opinion on something. I think it's actually very restrictive to set your focus on getting a job. So let's take concept art as our example, because that seems to be a real popular one. The problem with setting your sights on a concept art job, well, there's a lot of problems, but first is you might get caught up in the software like I did. You might say, oh, modern concept artists use Photoshop and ZBrush, so that means I have to use that. When the reality is that software is the ephemeral part. It seems to be changing faster as time goes on too. I mean, it wasn't really so long ago that ZBrush didn't even exist, and now who knows what software is going to be out in even 2 years from now. And while learning modern software is, yeah, it's important, but I would caution you from putting too much of your focus in that department. Like if you're a new student right now, just starting, say, college right now, and you are trying to learn the software, you might be outdated by the time you graduate. That's how fast this stuff moves. Now, my next point, on a broader and more important scale, concept art, for example, isn't really a thing. Like, it's not an art form. Concept art is just a job description created by the industry. All concept art is the process of communicating visual ideas. It's just being an artist. A good concept artist is a good artist. So to be a marketable concept artist, you actually need to fuse a wide variety of skills that will make you a great visual communicator, something that will separate you from the rest. And that leads me to my next piece of advice. A lot of people, and myself included in my early days, study a lot of artwork done by other artists. You know, artists they look up to. And that's completely fine as well. You should do that. But you have to know that if you study only from other artists, or if your studies are primarily from other artists, while you will certainly pick up some skills that way, what you're ultimately doing is studying what's been done before. And you're feeding your brain with old ideas. And I think that's a very dangerous thing because it chokes your creativity rather than lets it flourish. I mean, we all know there's a lot of competition out there these days, right? And to get noticed, you want to stand out, not blend in. And getting to the level where your work does stand out, that gets back to this idea of not knowing exactly the direction. And I just want to quickly interject, if you've been watching the progress of this painting, look at the direction it's taking now versus where it was going when I originally set out. I mean, yes, it was always a painting about dinosaur bones, but everything else about the story of this picture has changed as I discovered it, which only happened as I progressed. And there will continue to be changes like that right up until the very end. I mean, this painting is kind of a microcosm of exactly what I've been talking about. Okay, so let me get back now to how life drawing changed my life. Once I began learning drawing from the foundations, like I had nothing. I didn't even know what a gesture drawing was when I was 19. So starting from the bare bones beginning, I fell in love with the process of learning what it takes to become a good artist. And no longer was I myopically directing my art practice to fit the job descriptions that were available at the time. And that kind of broader focus allowed me to let in exploring other kinds of art that I probably never would have considered otherwise. Things like plein air painting and sculpture and charcoal rendering and gesture drawing, taking a sketchbook to a cafe with some markers and a pen. Things that don't seem self-evident when all you want to do is be an animator. And of course, it was during that time when I discovered painting, which was nothing short of a life revelation for me. Painting actually became like the mothership that all my other explorations filtered back into. And ultimately, what those other explorations are is the gathering of life experience. And this is a subject that most art schools completely ignore because, after all, you can't give someone life experience. It takes time and ultimately the volition to get out there. And again, I think if you have your focus on getting a job, you'll probably be apt to miss that aspect. And by doing so, you unintentionally put a ceiling on how good you can get. So I have to say, this is not a fast process. It took me years and it's still ongoing. I'm by no means a master. I'm just telling you what I've experienced so far and what I truly believe works. And I have conviction in this because when it comes to getting a job as an artist, as I began to filter all of these art lessons I was learning into my painting, I almost became employable by accident. Because what I had really been doing, unbeknownst to even me, is developing a voice, developing a style. And that's what the industry people respond to, and that's what other audiences respond to. When there is something intangible in your art that speaks to who you are as a unique person. A person with something to say, with a collection of life experiences, rather than someone who has just spent 3 years in college studying industry standard software. And of course, these are not mutually exclusive. You can be a student in college studying industry standard software while still getting out there to seek all these other experiences as well. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn here, but I've been a teacher for 10 years, and I can tell you that the students who truly do that, they're in the minority. I think most people, they identify who their favorite artists are and then spend years trying to paint like them. And, of course, I have my favorite artists too. But as I combined, my own unique set of life experiences into my work, I found that my work took a different direction. Like I love J.C. Leyendecker, for example. I love J.C. Leyendecker, one of my favorite painters ever. My work looks nothing like, I can't paint like him. It's just not in me to do it. I don't see like he did. I don't think like he did. I don't move like he did. But even though I love his work, my work took a different direction just by default because of the particular path I went down based on where I put my focus. And I find all that stuff real exciting because I know as I continue to explore all kinds of different areas and it all feeds back into the art, I know that I'll keep evolving as I go. Like art is not a static thing, just because you turn professional, it doesn't mean that you can't still grow. I look at my paintings from 5 years ago and compare them to what I'm doing today, and there's a difference. It's not even really a skill difference, although there is some skill difference. It's like a belief system difference. Like I can see where I've grown. This is all a very personal thing, but I can tell where I am doing things differently based on what I have learned as far as life experience goes. So, growing in art is exciting on a whole deeper level than simply skills. But I feel like I'm starting to get off topic now. So let's go back to the industry and, landing a job. I said at the beginning of this video that that's a subject that also involves focus, but it's a different kind of focus. This kind of focus revolves around how you present yourself to the world. So it goes without saying that in today's day and age, you need a website, you need a social media presence so people can see your work. That's the primary avenue that employers will see your work. And you have to fill that space with your work. People don't really carry around physical portfolios anymore. Your website is your portfolio. But what work do you put in there? This is where focus comes in this regard. One of the largest mistakes I see people making is they put a whole bunch of everything in their portfolio. And I did this too. My first portfolio back in 2005, it had life drawing, it had quick sketches, it had renderings, it had portraits, it had caricatures, it had backgrounds, it had all this different stuff. It was very unfocused. And that's because I put that portfolio together during a time in my life where I was still in the early processes of exploring and meandering. I hadn't really discovered who I was yet. And I remember I was at a job fair and I showed that portfolio to the art director who I wanted a job from. And I remember so clearly, the art director opened my portfolio, started flipping pages, and then he started flipping pages more slowly and slowly, and his expression became increasingly more puzzled until he stopped halfway through, kind of looked at me and said, "So what is it you want to do?" And that is a moment I will never forget because I learned an incredibly important lesson that day. Your portfolio needs to be focused. It is not supposed to be a record of everything you've ever learned about art. The goal of presenting your work is not to overwhelm the employer, but to convince them why they should hire you. You need to tell people unequivocally what it is you want to do, where your interests are, what you're good at, and what you bring to the table in a potential project. One thing I've learned is that people have a very narrow attention span when it comes to being presented with information. They want to get the point extremely quickly. I mean, that was the whole inspiration behind my 10 Minutes to Better Painting series, for example. But it's no different when it comes to presenting your portfolio. People want to go to your website and see exactly what it is you do from image number one. For example, if you went to my website, you won't see examples of my sculpture or my life drawing, even though I do those things. You'll see examples of where I think I'm employable. You'll see light and color, you'll see atmosphere, you'll see characters and backgrounds, and honestly that's about it. But within that, I can be employed as a concept artist, a matte painter, a background painter, a color key artist, a character designer, an illustrator. And my experience has been that with time comes more focus, because the more you learn about yourself and who you are as an artist, the more you can then focus your portfolio and find greater enjoyment in your employment because people are hiring you for what you're good at. And that is a statement that does not work in reverse. Alright guys, that was a discussion of some broader concepts that I've had in mind. In future videos, I'll get more and more specific. So here's a pan through of some of the more interesting areas of this painting. But hang on, don't click away yet. I want to show you one more thing you can do to keep exploring even after the painting is finished like this. It's just a basic color correction pass. I notice my painting is on the cool side, so I'll throw a new layer on it with a color burn mode in this case, throw a pretty aggressive color on it, dial it back with opacity, and then I'll give that layer a layer mask, which I will now paint black into with an airbrush. What that does is it reveals the layer underneath. So I'm basically revealing my original painting underneath. And I'm finding the increase of warms and cools is actually giving this painting a little more punch to it. And you know, sometimes I try this and I don't like the results, but in this case I actually like what's going on now a little bit better than what I had before. You know, the digital medium is great for this kind of color adjustment. So I'll probably use this as the final image. And of course, the reason I'm showing you this is not just to show you a cool Photoshop trick, but to encourage you to always be exploring even after your painting is finished. It's never really finished. Exploration is something that is ongoing. Anyway, thank you for joining me. There will be more installments to this series, but first I plan to get back to my 10 Minutes to Better Painting series for episode 4. And I invite you to contribute suggestions you might have for future topics for this series by simply posting them in the comments. So thank you again, and happy painting.